Teresa is a former head of human resources at a London city law firm. She was a member of the firm's management team and and has been involved in mergers and acquisitions, M&As, of smaller law firms. She was extensively involved in the onboarding and integration of the people from those merged firms, and she has extensive people management experience, working with people at every stage of their career. She's worked closely with those wishing to progress their careers. Teresa relocated to Ireland in November 2020 and took some time out. Significant year, if I can remember correctly. She spent some time thinking about what to do next and evaluating her own core skills of coaching, working with and managing people, and working with very different professional work environments. She has since started her business, Your Career Coach, and that was born in 2023. Teresa, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you.
Thank you very much, Podge. Can everybody hear me okay?
I couldn't hear you initially, and then I realized my volume was down to nothing. So I got a little mini, panic attack, but all good now. We can hear you perfectly clear.
Thanks, Podge, and thank you for that lovely introduction. That was very kind of you.
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful introduction. I just think it speaks to how you're so immersed in. I can just see from kind of your steps, like how you are in the space of career coaching now, and I'm super fascinated to speak to you about, and really excited for our listeners to kind of learn about your career progression and how you went from your position in human resources to starting your own business in 2023. And as I said, all the fun stuff that happened in those turbulent years in between, I'm sure they had some sort of an influence. So I think a good place to start, Teresa, is maybe by telling us all a bit about, your background and maybe how you got started in human resources or just with your career in general.
Okay, so human resources, my career for most of my life has been something that I've always enjoyed hugely. My last role was probably the most satisfying role of my career, and I absolutely loved it. As you quite rightly said, I was part of a law firm whose strategy was merger and acquisitions. We had a fairly aggressive recruitment policy in that we were recruiting lots of lateral hire partners. It was a super job. I worked with a management team, a very supportive management team, director of finance, IT, facilities, marketing. And crucially for that business, they actually had quite strong leadership as well. So our leadership board, there were three, they were really excellent. The job was amazing because I got to do things that I think perhaps standalone HR people wouldn't normally get to do, being involved in the acquisition of a law firm from a HR perspective, doing key person interviews. And when I suppose the transaction completed was actually the cultural integration of those people into the business. So it was really, really fascinating stuff. I suppose to answer your sort of second question is, what drove me into HR? Fascination with humans, I think. Fascination with human behavior, how we interact with each other, our communities, how people work together, how you can bring a team together to make them work really well together. What are all the dynamics involved in that? And it's a job I enjoyed for a very, very long time. And then, of course, I suppose we have to talk about COVID.
Hmm.
And just the huge impact that had on everybody. My firm, we didn't have a culture of working from home. We were primarily all office based with the occasional bit of working from home. London was very slow to close down. And when we did close down, we had 98% of our staff at home who'd never worked at home before. That had a huge impact on them, and indeed everybody that found themselves in that position. We had quite a collegiate working environment at work where people, when you talk about these water cooler moments you have when people meet each other in the kitchen and they chat and they have that sort of connection with people. Suddenly we went from that kind of environment to people logging on to Teams meetings and Zoom meetings and sort of just saying, oh, hi, how are you? So all the sort of nice collegiate community bits of the work had gone.
You're kind of missing all those little touch points that just kind of
Absolutely.
they can just be small. I can say like, "Hey Teresa, how was your weekend?" You can say, "Oh, we
Exactly.
went," and you're just kind of building a connection organically.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think for junior staff to actually just see how senior people work and see how they behave around clients.
Mhm.
That all got missed as well. One of the things that I tried to do was, because we weren't actually doing the sort of big ticket work at that point, because things had sort of slowed down, so there wasn't much lateral hire recruitment, there wasn't much happening in the mergers and acquisition space. So I found myself providing quite a lot of support to people. You'd meet somebody in the corridor at work, hey, how are you? And they'd say, yeah, yeah, I'm great, thanks. You pick up a phone to speak to somebody who's working at home at their kitchen table, like I had to do for the first 6 or 7 weeks. How are you? Elicits a completely different
Yeah.
response. And I always felt I had a responsibility to listen to that response. And I suppose provide support as and when like people needed it. And that was an important part of my job. And I'm very, very glad I was able to do it. But it does take a toll on people as well.
I was going
I think it took a toll on me.
I was going to ask, it sounds like there's like a lot, like the increased emotional support you had to provide for your
Yeah,
employees, like significantly increased throughout COVID. And
yeah,
then there's a
absolutely.
question of who's looking after you, do you know, who's supporting you? And
Yeah, absolutely. What I found was I sort of developed some quite good habits as regards looking after myself. I used to walk. I started to walk in the mornings, and I started to build in very good routines around my life. So I would leave my house at, I don't know, 7 a.m. and we had, I don't know if you remember this. Do you remember the 5 kilometer
yes,
spaces that you couldn't go outside? So I would walk for within that 5 kilometers, come home, switch on and work, and then make sure I take breaks. Because initially, Podge, before I started to do that, I would sort of take a break and go and make a sandwich or something and like try to take a step away from my laptop. And then as soon as I heard the emails coming in, I was rushing back to the laptop with my sandwich in my hand. And that's not healthy. So yeah, I sort of built in quite a lot of good habits in terms of my my usage of email and the computer at home, taking proper breaks, and really just looking after myself as well.
yeah, that's so much easier said than done.
Absolutely.
To go way back to when you were speaking about London and the lockdown, I always remember I have a cousin who's living and working in London, and he actually was sending videos. He was cycling through London city empty. There was literally like him and two other friends or something. And I was
I
just thinking
know.
at the time, I was like, one, this is insane. And then I was two, like, there might never be a time in history again where he'll get the opportunity to like
Yeah,
cycle through London with nothing going on and like no traffic, no
absolutely.
people. Yeah.
Absolutely. Because when we were allowed back into the office again and the office was opened and we could actually go in, I used to actually, I'd get off at London Bridge and I used to walk from London Bridge or Cannon Street up to my office, which is sort of right through the city. And it was deathly quiet. It was so strange, so bizarre, strangely comforting in kind of a way,
Yeah.
because you had the silence. And I think silence in a city is a rare thing, but it actually can be a very lovely thing as well.
Yeah. It's, as I say, like, yeah, we might never experience it again in our
No,
lifetimes.
no, probably not.
For people who might be like less familiar with mergers and acquisitions, like it's essentially like two businesses coming together or like one
Yes,
absorbing the other or vice versa.
yes,
So in terms of the complexities of humans, right, you have two sometimes like similar, sometimes totally distinct
yeah,
cultures, ways of
yeah,
living, ways of working, ways of
yeah,
being. And your role as in the HR department there is like to be that cultural merge, like and
yeah.
get people integrated together, so that's either like one culture becoming the norm or else it's like
Mhm.
two cultures working together to form something new.
Yeah.
Like either way, incredibly complex, incredibly difficult. How did you, or how do you look to manage that or like support people through those transitions, because I can imagine they could be incredibly tough.
It can, and I suppose one of the things that would be sort of quite different is how people actually work on a day-to-day basis. So I'm going to give a really simplistic example. If you work in a business where you record time, so that's done online and you click it in and your time is recorded and you have all the training in that. But if you're from a smaller business where you're not used to that level of time recording, that can be a huge shock. You might be sort of writing a little bit down on a bit of paper and thinking, oh, I'll add that in somewhere later. So time recording, it was training and training and training and getting people to understand why they were recording time in this particular way
Mhm.
and what the input was and then what the output was at the end. And I always say to people, train, train again, and then train some more, and then train some more again, until people actually they take the steps, they understand the process, but they also understand what's going on behind it. So training is key, I think, so that at least people are comfortable in what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. And I think that gives them a sort of certain sense of confidence in the job that they're doing. The second thing we tried to do was arrange social functions, so where people could just meet together as on a more informal basis.
Mhm.
And then on a departmental level would be various departmental meetings where it was an opportunity to get to know people as well. There would be differences of things like how holidays were dealt with, perhaps how people their working hours, that might be something that was quite different. Generally it worked quite well. I think training and communication are the two
Yeah.
key things to sort of integrate people. Of course, then you've got the different management styles. So if somebody was coming into a department, somebody who had a management style that they'd never worked with under before, then that might take some adjustment, might take some talking about as well.
Yeah, it sounds like a key, like there is you've a lot of emphasis on the training part, but even as you were
Yeah,
discussing training, you mentioned it at the end, but it's the clear communication. And because I
absolutely.
can imagine a lot of communication, I can imagine maybe a certain resistance of like it could be like an us versus them
Yeah,
mentality a
yeah,
lot. And you
absolutely.
through like those social gatherings too, like you're trying to break down those kind of barriers to show like we are now
Yeah.
one company.
Because what you're always trying to do is find the common ground.
Hmm.
And it's even things like quizzes and mixing people up in teams like that. That can be a really good way of saying, we're all on the same team here, literally on the same team, and quite good to get people to talk and integrate. And it all goes back to communication. If you if you start talking to people and listening to them, which is key, then I think a lot of those bumps on the roads can be overcome. A lot, not all, but a lot can be overcome.
Did COVID times make that communication more challenging for you because it's more on digital platforms now? Like, can more information get
Um,
lost?
I think it did. I think we all needed to learn how to communicate online on screens because I quite like to communicate in person, but I got very very used to doing it on Zoom and Teams. And yeah, you do get used to it. It's a different skill set, I think, in some respects. I think. I think in a Zoom meeting, you're sort of maybe paying a bit more attention to the person. You're sort of looking for the cues
Yes.
and stuff that maybe it's much easier to pick up when you're talking to somebody in person.
Yeah, and if you have multiple people on a Zoom call, it's like it's much more taxing to be looking at
Yeah,
the
it is.
individuals
Yeah,
on the screen.
it
I
is.
mean,
Yeah,
it,
absolutely.
and if you've larger meetings, it's probably impossible because like if you're addressing hundreds of people, yeah, you can't be looking
No,
at all their body language and their cues.
no,
And
no, you can't.
that's one thing I found from work as well, right? There's one thing like you saying something, but you actually have to look at it from the other lens, like what am I saying? But then how is it being received? And I
Yeah,
think that's
yeah,
a really vital piece to that because it could be
yeah,
received even if half the people or a couple receive it totally different. Now everyone's
yeah,
going off in different directions with different
yeah.
ideas.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I suppose with Zoom, I think you have to be very, anything online, you have to be very, very clear about what you're communicating. Because as I say, you could have three people and one could pick up one message and the other would say, well, no, she didn't mean that. She meant this. So
Yeah.
that goes back to me not communicating properly and not being clear enough.
Yeah, yes, I agree with you. It's a different skill set. I don't want to say it's more intentional, but it's intentional in just different aspects. I think just more
Yeah,
intentional in like the words you say specifically because you don't
yeah,
have that opportunity in real time to go like I misspoke or I can see by your body
yeah,
language like this isn't what I'm
yeah.
saying. I want to rephrase. It's harder to
Yeah.
get those cues.
Yeah, it is. It absolutely is. Yeah, it
Mhm.
absolutely is. But I think people are getting used to it. I think it's more a part of life now. I do a lot of work on Zoom, and yeah, it probably can't really tell the difference now. I still like to see people in person now.
Yeah, and I can see that dichotomy though happening in real life. There's, well, businesses too, right? A lot of them have like these beautiful, expensive spaces. So I know there's some like companies want to justify the space that they're renting,
Yeah,
but there is like this push pull now between should we be in office, should we not? I personally think there's a happy medium in between where
yeah,
it's hybrid, and I think it's actually personalized for individuals. I think some individuals can function perfectly fine depending on their job and their
yeah.
like characteristics.
Mhm.
Whereas I think some people would really struggle with a remote environment and they're best served to be present. Like you said, like newer people maybe starting out career path, maybe being with a mentor in like a real life space is going to excel your career a lot quicker
Yeah,
than being isolated
absolutely.
at home. So
Absolutely.
it's like multifaceted, but I just say that to kind of bring it back. I see a push pull now, right? There's the let's all work from home. Oh, we've done studies, like productivity is the same. It's actually up. And then it's
Yeah,
like, oh, work life balance is actually more blurred. People are getting more stressed because they're actually not switching off from work. And now it's a case
yeah.
of we should be in the office 2 days. And now it's like, maybe we should come in 3 days a week. And some companies are saying, oh, we're
Yeah.
going back full time. So there's a lot going on in that respect at this time, isn't there?
There is. Yeah, there is. And I think I'm kind of on the same page with you here. I think a happy medium, I think, is what's required. But interestingly, just to sort of make one final point, this year I was talking to a couple of not quite graduates, almost graduates. They're in their sort of second last year of university, and they're doing the summer vacation schemes. Some of them are doing it from home, and others are actually office based. And I just wonder how much you're going to learn about the profession you're going to enter if you're not actually in the work environment with them, if you're working from home. Whereas the people that have actually been in the office for 5 days a week, for the entire summer, are absolutely thriving. So I think it's going to be an interesting topic for people for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna just paraphrase this really, really badly, but I don't know if you follow Simon Sinek online. He's like basically a thought leader in this space in the workplace and stuff as well in communication. But he just mentioned about like there's stories around. He'd say the younger generation are when they're being asked to come back into work, like they're extremely anxious. So when
Yeah.
they go back into the office, and what they attribute that to is being in the office. But he was saying what it actually is like you're too accustomed to being at home and not used to being in the office. It's kind of like if you start an exercise program, the first week or two is like your body's going to be aching sore, it's going to be hell, it's going to be super
Yes.
difficult. But then after a while, you get into your rhythm and you start
Yeah.
building. And he was kind of
Absolutely.
equating that to work in the office. So people go in immediately and go like, I'm too anxious, like this is a bad environment to be in. Whereas it's like if you
Hmm.
get through that initial phase, like it
Yeah.
can actually be really
Yeah.
fruitful for you and your career growth too.
And I would say if people are being asked to go back into the office and spend a bit more time there and they're struggling with it, talk to their manager, talk to HR. They will make it easier. They will try to make that transition as easy as possible for people.
Yeah, I think a lot of companies are conscious of that as well, and HR
Yeah.
departments have evolved, like even since COVID, kind of
Mhm.
similar to the
Absolutely.
story you're speaking of. Like there's way more kind of emotional support being provided.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it was a long time coming, but it's good to see that it's here.
Yeah, COVID probably accelerated that to an extent, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I don't think we would be where we are if we hadn't had COVID. To be honest, if we hadn't had to go through that particular period of time. So yeah.
Speaking of that particular period, it was a life changing event for you too, right? You decided to come
Yes.
back to Killarney at that time.
Yeah, yeah. So I did, and it was always the intention to sort of relocate back here. And I think COVID was such a period of such uncertainty that plan to do it in the next couple of years sort of got. Well, I think we could probably do this now. I
Right.
think we're both kind of done with it. So yeah, it did accelerate the decision. So we left London in November 2020, just as they were about to head into another lockdown. I came back to Ireland. I spent the first 2 weeks in Ireland in isolation because that was the rules then.
Oh,
Um,
that's right.
yeah, yeah. So that was an interesting time, and I felt like for the first year and a half that I was here, as a society, we spent most of it in lockdown, which I think had some interesting impacts on us. I think, or on me. I certainly did way more walking and got way closer to nature than I ever had been. Because if people don't know Killarney, it's very beautiful place, beautiful national park, beautiful walking. So yeah, that kind of the decision was there to move, but COVID just accelerated it.
So you moved back during COVID, like the decision to leave that job, which you really, really
Mhm.
loved, like that must not
Yeah.
have been easy. So how did you go about filling that void, career wise?
So when I came here first, for the first 2 or 3 months, I don't think we did very much. I did very much other than walk, and then I started to read, and I started to read quite a lot about psychology, what motivates people. I started to read quite a lot about leadership, and I had thought about, or maybe I will sort of go back into human resources again, and I could potentially work locally. And when I did some personal evaluation, I praised myself. um, I thought, actually, do you know, I don't really want to do that anymore. I have got skills that I want to utilize elsewhere. And for me, the driver really is I want to do something that I love. And what I love is a coaching aspect of my job. I just enjoy that. All my previous experience of managing people and working with people, my own interest in the human mind and what motivates people, I suppose that drove me to coaching.
Yeah, let's obviously the people here will be quite unaware. Like, what does your career coach offer?
Right. So I work with a cross section of people. I do a lot in the career change. I suppose a lot with people who are trying to change career, who've maybe been in a particular career for 10, 15 years and want to step out and do something different. I work with graduates who have finished and got their degrees, and they are, what now? What am I going to do next? You know, I have a CV, I've never done an interview. So I'll do a lot around that. I do a lot with people that are trying to progress in their career. So those that are trying to get promotion, that want to apply for promotion, what that's going to involve for them, the impact it's going to have on them, the skills that they're going to need to develop for that. And occasionally I work with people that are about ready to step out of the job market and are thinking about perhaps retiring completely. And that's really in a nutshell the kind of work that I do. I've also worked quite a lot with people who are in toxic work environments and who are really looking for another path and maybe an exit into something different. And that's been quite a big part of my work in the last, I think in the last sort of 6 to 9 months. I found that's been a big sort of piece of what I've been doing.
Yeah, let's hone in on that actually. I think at this time as well. Like, how does someone know that they're in a toxic work environment?
So how do they know? There's a really good definition of a toxic work environment. It's when the number of negative indicators begin to affect the well-being of the person involved. And the negative indicators, in my experience, are things like weak leadership, poor management, poor communication, aggressive communication, inappropriate communication, favoritism, bullying people, moving boundaries or having no boundaries, moving timelines, moving goalposts for no apparent reason. So they would be what I would call the negative indicators of what a toxic workplace is. And when you start to talk to somebody about those, the kind of you can see them nodding, oh yeah, yeah, that's I have that. That's part of my work. That's part of my work. And I suppose that's it in a nutshell. It's that negative indicator and the prevalence of it. And unfortunately, from what I can see from my work, toxic work environments are becoming, I don't know whether they're becoming more talked about or there's just more toxicity around. I really don't know about that.
Yeah, that's actually a very good question. Maybe the answer lies it is a bit of both. You know, a very
Yeah.
nuanced answer. You,
Hmm.
Teresa, there was like so much to unpack there when you were talking about kind of the negative.
Yeah.
How did you coin it? Like the negative indicators.
Yeah.
So I think one of the first ones you said was around like poor management or
Yeah.
leadership. Like, how do I know I have a bad manager?
If the communication is inconsistent, if you're given tasks and goals that change constantly, if you're not given clear direction in what you're supposed to be doing, if somebody thinks it's appropriate to ring you on a Saturday evening at 4 o'clock because they haven't done their part of the job, if somebody seeks to blame you for work that was ultimately their responsibility. And the reason that the work hasn't been produced properly is because they failed to give you the clear communication on it and some clear direction. So that's a lot of information there. Sorry.
It is a lot, but it's a lot of good information because I think it is one very clear indicator, and I think the manager has probably one of, if not the biggest says of someone
Yeah.
having fulfillment in their career. So like if you are, if there's any managers out there as well, feel free to drop questions for Teresa. But you have such a big responsibility, whether you're in charge of one
Yeah.
person or 100 people, to do right by that person too. So yeah, I think if you're making life unhappy for your employees, like it's a huge factor to them being just unhappy in the workplace in general. You mentioned kind of about the changing tasks and doing it frequently. I'm trying to think through different lenses, right? You might have a manager who's maybe like the CEO, like he's in charge, like he makes, like
Mhm.
in a large sense, he kind of creates the direction or
Yeah.
moves the company in a direction. But you might have a middle manager who's maybe receiving information from above that's contradicting, and now they're in like the weird juxtaposition. So now they're giving their employee, the people, their direct reports, conflicting because they're only going by what's been given to them. And
Yeah.
there's so many kind of like different things at play, especially when it comes to that vision. Because I do think that's very
Yeah.
important, right? I think you need to know the direction. It's sports, it's business. You
Absolutely.
need to all be moving in a particular direction, or else you kind of lack a sense of organizational
Yeah.
identity, you know. And I think that
Yeah.
organizational identity is key to knowing how you fit within the organization. So it was interesting you said about the kind of changing of tasks frequently, because I can see a middle manager being stuck in the middle of all that too.
I think, I suppose I would have a certain amount of sympathy for the middle manager, but a lot to do is it's all about communication. Again, we go back to communication. If he feels that he hasn't, or she feels that they haven't got the right information or the correct information or enough information, then they should be confident enough to actually say to the person that's above them, maybe the top manager, okay, so what's the purpose of this? How will this impact? I need a little bit more information before I go down to the team. I hear too many times of people being given tasks, having to work, to a ridiculous deadline to produce a particular paper on a project. And then because it's needed for a meeting on a Friday, they get told Tuesday, the meeting's Friday. They do everything in they can to get it delivered on time. They go for feedback after the meeting and the manager goes, oh yeah, well, we didn't get around to talking about it. That's bad management. That's appalling.
Yeah, I think one thing, if I'm thinking in like sporting career or just general career, one thing that I feel really exudes like a poor manager is I think you mentioned feedback. I think when the feedback is too vague or not personalized enough to
Yeah.
the person they're giving the feedback, like is it's not helpful. Like is some classic things you can think of sporting wise, or like keep doing what you're doing, or try harder, or maybe in a career it could be something like you just have to communicate better, something so vague like that. Like that's not tangible. Like an
No,
employee, or
it's
I
not.
can't do anything with
No,
that
no,
information. So I
no,
think
no, you can't.
it's so important to be specific. And I remember one of the best managers I had would create, like they're called, like you do them in the interview process, definitely, like your SOAR, your STAR
Mhm,
format stories, but she would present them of me, like to me, and it would really give me a good indication of what I done well in this instance, or that it might be
yeah,
one about I did this well, but then I can add this element to
mhm.
improve this area even more. So I think being really specific with your feedback is vital.
Oh, it's crucial, because if you're specific with your feedback, the person goes away feeling my manager was interested enough in me to give me this feedback, and now I've actually got something to go with and that I can work on for my own progression to help me get to the next stage of of whatever I want to do. So yes, I couldn't agree with you more on that.
Yeah, I would think the majority, depending on the career, obviously. I think some people, it's fair to acknowledge too. Like I'm a person who values growth and development and constantly
Mhm.
want to be building on the next thing. But I'd be remiss to say, like, there's people out there who have their jobs, they're their 9 to 5s, that's all they want to
Yeah,
do. Like that's
absolutely,
perfectly
absolutely,
fine too. So I think it's about finding what works
absolutely.
best for the
Yeah,
the person
yeah,
you're trying to help.
absolutely, absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more.
One of the many kind of negative aspects that you mentioned, I think I heard boundaries in there.
Yes,
What do you mean by
boundaries.
boundaries?
Boundaries are within a work environment, what is correct and oh right, okay, so I'm not right. Let me start again. A boundary is something that you put in place with work to really sort of protect your own well-being. So the best example I can give of that is emails. Is it appropriate for somebody to be emailing you at 11 p.m. at night for no apparent reason? No, it's not. So setting a boundary in is something that you have that I suppose not doesn't prevent. It's almost a barrier between you and the work, and something that protects you and your personal life and your personal well-being. I think that's a better explanation.
Yeah, and sometimes it's probably hard for people to even realize that they're being affected by a lack of boundaries. You know, it might become a norm that you're expected to answer an email at 11 o'clock or 11 o'clock at night. You mightn't actually do too much retrospective thinking into like, how is this affecting me in the long term? Do you know, I think I've been in that position myself where I've worked long hours. Like I was super passionate, like super invested in the work I'm
Mhm.
doing, and that kind of made me not realize that, oh, maybe I'm like really inflicting on my boundaries here. Like it could be 6 months down the line I realize, oh shit, like I'm burnt out right now. Like this didn't just creep up overnight. Like this has been happening for a long time. So I'm assuming people you work with, like it can be, is it hard sometimes to maybe identify those boundaries, or like what is the best approach for them?
Okay, so if somebody's in a toxic work environment and we're talking about boundaries, the first thing I always say to them is you cannot change your situation, but you can change how you react to it. And that's really key. That's an absolute pivot moment. Um, and then we go on to talk about boundaries. Some people are quite visual, so we would work on creating a visual boundary. So just a physical boundary, hands in front, hands to the side, hands to the back. That's your boundary. The area in between you and that sort of boundary wall, that's your safe space. That works really well for some people. For other people, we might want to talk about routine and actually putting in place a good, healthy routine that you mentioned answering emails at 11 p.m. Unless you're on a critical mission, is there a need to answer an email at 11 p.m.? I'm not entirely sure there is. If you're in a toxic work environment, the most important thing in your evening is that you actually turn your phone off, shock horror, and you put your emails to one side and you have an hour and a half or so, or 2 hours before you go to sleep at night, where you actually you have your ritual, you maybe listen to some music, do some mindfulness, whatever it is you do. But you're not checking an email the last thing before you close your eyes at night and you see something and you think, oh my God, and then you can't sleep. And then you're awake half the night and you wake up at super early, 4 o'clock in the morning, and you can't rest or anything and you're trying to deal with these emails. So a ritual and a boundary at night is very good. And I would also encourage people to do it in the morning as well, not to, like I did this morning, reach for my phone when I came
Yeah.
downstairs, but to actually have your breakfast, do whatever you do in the morning, and then maybe on your commute, open your email and see what's there. And what you've got then, Podge, is you've got from maybe 8 p.m. at night to, I don't know, 7 p.m. or 7 a.m. in the morning. You've got 11 hours of
Sleep.
sleep, and not necessarily sleep, but you've got that number of hours away from your situation, and that's healthy. In terms of when people are actually in the office, I always encourage people to take that break if they are taking a lunch hour, just go for a walk, go and sit outside. There's nothing like being outside with a bit of natural light. Go for a walk. Again, you don't even have to take your phone with you. So it's just creating that healthy boundary between you and work and just putting some good habits in place. And I know I was listening to one of your other podcasts and you were talking about box breathing. And I think managing and controlling your breathing is also a really good way of just calming yourself and being calm. And it's a healthy habit as well. So just a healthy habit within a boundary.
Yeah, I think they're quickly becoming a bit more normalized. Like they might have been
Yeah.
something 10 or 15 years ago you wouldn't even dream of doing, on a break, like a bit of box breathing or
Yeah.
yeah, it's good how there's kind of more emphasis and just people are like believing more that these do have a really important, and they do have a really important calming effect.
Yeah, they do. And I remember if I was going into like an important meeting or I had an important interview to do that I was maybe nervous about, or it was going to be, a bit of a pivot point in whatever I was doing, I would spend a couple of minutes just at my desk, grounding my feet into the ground and putting my hands on the desk and just taking a couple of big deep breaths. And that helps enormously. Well, it helped me enormously.
You mentioned kind of at the start around boundaries that it's not the situation itself, but how you kind of react to
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
situation. I heard Adam Grant mention something called the second grade. Have you heard about this?
No, I haven't. No.
It's super interesting. So the example he gave is, imagine like you were a student or you're just receiving results from a test. So you're sitting at your desk. Teacher comes down, puts the test onto your table. It's an F. So now you've received an F on your test, which is like the first grade, we'll say.
Yeah.
So do you look up at the teacher and go like, "What the? This is wrong. I did not get an F. Do you know why did you give me an F?" Or do you say like, "Oh, it's because Susie Jones was distracting me when I was trying to do the test," or "It's because I wasn't feeling too good that day." Like, you're coming up with all these excuses.
Yeah.
But the second grade is like, how do I react to the first thing? So you get the
Mhm.
F and you say, "Okay, I have the F. Now what do I do to improve that moving forward?" Like, do I study a little better? Let's analyze, where did well, if you got an
Mhm.
F, you went wrong in a lot of places, I guess. But where did I go wrong that like needs improvement first and foremost? So it's all about this reacting to the state that you're in.
Mhm.
And that was kind of an example of like a negative state. So it sounds similar when you're speaking of a toxic
Yeah.
environment. It's not a case of like, I received an email at 11 o'clock. Oh God, I hate getting these
Yeah.
emails. It's kind of like, okay, I received email at 11 o'clock. Is anything going to blow up in the next few hours? 99.9999%, the
No.
answer is going to be no. So,
No.
okay, this is outside my working hours. I choose to leave it. I will address it when I'm in the
Yeah.
office. Like, that's your
Absolutely.
second grade.
Yeah. Absolutely. There was, I always remember hearing about this. There was somebody who worked in a particular environment, and an email came around it was like August time, so summertime, and an email came around, and the email was something to do with Christmas. So 8 people respond. The email came from quite a senior person. 8 people piled on, giving their answers in at 10 o'clock at night in August to something for Christmas. And that's a nonsense. That's a complete nonsense. And when the person who didn't respond went into the office the following day and said, "Oh, I need to talk to you about that email that came around last night." Too late. We've already made the decision. What, at 10 o'clock at night in August for something that's going to happen at Christmas?
Yeah, unnecessary urgency right there.
Unnecessary urgency.
So we had around boundaries. Like, let's use an example here, and I can give my own personal example. Is you probably have this thing in your mind, right? I'm working Monday to Friday. Weekends are my boundary. But sometimes I feel a little stuck because the work that I do isn't very like time based, in a sense. I don't have to get it done between the Monday 9 to 5.
Yeah.
It's very much project based, and
Hmm.
sometimes, like, I'll fully admit, like on a Sunday evening, I like to sit down and do like 1 or 2 hours of like prepping or tidying or getting myself set
Hmm.
up for the week, because I find it drastically reduces my like
Yeah.
stress or my workload throughout the week. Like, is that bad? Is that good?
No, no, it's not bad at all. It's because it's within you're controlling it, and what you're managing it. It's your decision, and actually, what you're doing is making the rest of the working week easier to manage.
I think that's a
You've Yeah, and it just gives you that step ahead. And as we're doing full disclosure here, I used to do the same thing. Like an hour on a Sunday night, clear out the emails, get the diary looked at, get things set up in your own mind. It can be a good thing. It's not for
yeah.
everybody, but it can be a very good thing.
I think that the point that really kind of gave me a eureka moment was when you mentioned like it is within your control. So that
Yeah,
immediately switched the dynamic for me.
yeah,
So
yeah,
um I'm not receiving instruction from a
yeah,
manager or from someone else. I'm actually, yeah, I'm taking this on myself to
yeah.
do this.
Because it
Yeah.
will make your life easier, and it might
Yes.
free up some of your time during the week.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Perfect distinction. Yeah, thank you so much for that. Anything else around a toxic work environment? Like, maybe what steps can employees take to decide, is it worth to stay and fight in this job, which I'm sure you've experienced, or is it time to dip out? Like, how do people differentiate between that?
Okay, so when people come to me and we have the initial discussion and I hear what they have to say about the toxic environment, and sometimes people are very clear they want to leave and they're not going to entertain anything other than they want to leave. But there are people that may be on the fence, and I suppose the conversation I would often have with them, because as a coach, it's not my job to tell them what to do. I would say, okay, so tell me about the impact the job had on you when you started. And they tell me a little bit about it. Okay, let's shift on 6 months to where you are now. What impact does it have on you now? Okay, and then they tell you. And I say, well, let's big step forward, 12 months down the line. Where do you think you're going to be in this environment if you can't change things? And that usually sets up a thought process in them. Do a lot of people stay and fight? They don't, to be honest. Sometimes it's just too big a battle, I think, for them, and they don't. But yeah, I think having the conversation with them about how they felt when they joined and the impact it's having on them after 6 months and then 12 months down the line. And if you've worked in a toxic environment, just simply the idea of being there in 12 months' time would have you running for the hills.
Do you, in terms of, it sounds like work on the past, like look at what your work was like in the past, look at what your work was like presently, and then kind of envision like, hey, you can see this downward trajectory here in terms of like how miserable that you are in your
Mhm.
job.
Yeah,
It's not going to improve. I'm curious, there must be some situations where people are super tied. Like this start was maybe unbelievably good. Maybe they started with a small company and they're like really
yeah,
entrenched in the culture and they're actually like entwined. They are part of the culture. And now it's maybe the business could be growing, maybe it's merged with another business and the culture has shifted, but you still have that like remnants of, oh, this was like beautiful. Like I am part of
yeah,
something big here.
yeah,
Sometimes I can envision a lot of ambivalence in those situations where people are finding it hard. It's kind of like a relationship. If you're with someone in a
yeah,
relationship, you get so intertwined together.
yeah,
You identify with each other. Then as you move on, you maybe realize, I don't know, are we best match? But like that realization can like, it can be such a big life event for you. It's
yeah,
and the
it
stress
can.
levels are, I can just see situations like that being really tough.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think one of I think what happens to people is if they have been in a job for a long time, and like you say, they've become sort of so entrenched into it, they might find it quite difficult to deal with change. So any company that's growing, there are going to be changes. So, you see it in startups actually. That's probably the best example. So a startup might have 6 guys or 6 girls or 12 of them all together, all working really long hours. They're all moving in the right direction. They socialize together. Everything's brilliant and amazing. And they have quite a particular way of working. And then actually the company becomes bigger. They might bring in some management, things change. The sort of idea and the culture that brought them together starts to wane a bit. That can be very difficult. And as I say, you sometimes see it in startups, quite a lot in startups actually.
Yeah, startups just an ever changing environment,
Yeah,
and you might need different leaders
absolutely.
for different phases. Yeah, there's a
Absolutely.
host of things we can go into, like extreme
Yeah.
growth and a lot of things to be
Yeah.
up against. Teresa, I'm curious. Can you explain are you familiar with the concept? I think you are, of the toxic work triangle.
I am, yes. So the toxic work triangle, basic triangle. At the top, you have. I don't like the word perpetrator, but let's call it perpetrator. The main instigator. One corner, you have the followers, and then you have the people that do nothing. So that is the toxic triangle. You've always got the ringleader. You've got people that follow for whatever reason, because they're scared. They don't want to be the one that's in the firing line. And then you've got people who do nothing and just let the toxicity grow and grow and grow and grow and eventually ruin the business. Because ultimately, toxicity will ruin a business. Particularly if you look at one of the symptoms of a toxic work environment is high staff turnover. So if you've recruited all these fabulous people and you've brought them in at great cost into a work environment, the environment is toxic, they're not going to hang around, they go. So as a business, what you've done is you've lost your opportunities. So it's bad for business. Toxic work environments are bad for business.
Don't even want to put a bottom dollar on that as well. The amount
No,
of money in terms of
no.
recruitment and
Yeah. Yeah. And it's very difficult. You can monitorize recruitment, but it's very difficult to monitorize the loss of the opportunity that these people would
Mhm.
have provided the business in growing it and developing it. That's very, very hard to monitorize.
Yeah, and depending on what sector you're in too, it could be
Mhm.
you could have a big pool of talent, you could have a small pool, but like negative
Absolutely.
sentiment spreads
Absolutely.
massively.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what people fail to realize is, you work in a particular environment. Like I worked in law in the City of London, and you think they won't know anything about any other firms. We all knew where the toxic firms were. We all knew where the difficult people were within different businesses, and firms got a particular reputation for sort of putting up with that kind of behaviour, or
Mhm.
on the other side of the coin, been really collegiate and been really amazing to work for.
It's definitely important not to underestimate like how even though there's so many businesses out there, like you can be quite aware and quite linked and quite small in a sense
Yeah,
too, as in you are all
absolutely,
connected. And
absolutely.
so just to for the audience, just to go over it again, you have your triangle, you have a
Yes,
perpetrator at the top, you have
top.
follower and followers and people who do nothing. Is the perpetrator like usually in a higher status if you want to look at it through a
Um,
hierarchy?
it can be sometimes, or it can be somebody who's just got this really big domineering personality. And it might be somebody that management is afraid of, or they're afraid of tackling the person and their bad behavior. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a manager at all.
And I've been in instances in my own career, and I'm not saying like we'd say this person is a perpetrator, we'll say in a full sense, but there's sometimes you might be in a meeting or something happens that inappropriate's maybe too strong, but something that kind of like ruffles the group a small bit. And I think you know intuitively as a
Yeah,
manager, like, okay, things not right there. Earlier on in my career, I think it was only maybe once or twice because I got stung so bad. You choose not to address. So you say,
yeah,
that's okay. It was like low
yeah,
level. I'll leave it
yeah,
slide.
yeah.
Do not leave it slide.
Never
It
let it
comes back
slide.
bigger and it just bites you harder. It's like
Yeah,
you'll end up dealing with something 100 times worse.
yeah.
So that's one
Oh,
harsh lesson I've learned is like if you see something, like say something and in real time give that
yeah.
feedback is crucial.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it can be difficult. Everybody's busy. They've got lots on their plates, but you need to call it out as soon as you see it. Because if you don't, you're growing a monster then. Because people realize, oh, I got away with that once. I'll push it a bit more and I'll push it a bit more,
Yeah.
and suddenly, you know, you're in a bad territory.
You might have, like you said, in terms of our triangle, you might have those followers who jump on board,
Yeah.
and then you might have,
Yeah.
I think it can be easy to overlook the people that say nothing, but like sometimes saying nothing speaks volumes too. And I know in
Yeah.
the cultural world at the moment, you might it's a bit of it's even an old phrase at this point, but you might have heard the term like quiet quitting. Do you know like or
Yeah.
quiet vacationing is the
Yeah.
new one, Teresa, where people are taking off on holidays while working, which uh, interesting. But sometimes you do have to be aware of the people who are saying nothing. You know, you want to be
Yeah.
able to sometimes the perpetrator or the person who's like like you said, the more domineering can actually end up taking up 80% of the time, which is unfair to
Yeah.
the rest of the people in
Absolutely.
the workplace.
Absolutely. And unless the perpetrator, is actually dealt with there and then by quite a strong supervisor or manager, then it's going to become a real problem for the business. Real
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I do like to use a technique when it is kind of if you want to say like dealing with perpetrators, like the a few kind of frameworks I have is first is you kind of think about and I got this from the book. I can't remember who it's by, but is it just called accountability? I'll try to get the name. I'll put it for audience members as well. But you have to determine like what is the issue, like a motivational thing or is it an ability thing? Like are they motivationally like not tuned in? So that's like are they acting out because they're disinterested, they don't really
Hmm.
care, but then the ability thing is like, are they acting out because they don't have a skill set that they need to be successful? So you can
Yeah.
determine from there. I mean, if it's a motivational issue, I think you've more of a problem because that means it's an attitude or
Yeah.
cultural fit, and
Yeah.
they can be tougher conversations. Where if it's an ability thing, like you can address it as such and get them training and get them support and help them that way too. So that's kind of a way I like to look at if I am dealing with a difficult conversation. And then when you're actually in the conversation itself, I don't know if you give techniques to maybe people in your business, but I would like to it's not accusatory, right? You don't say like you did this, you were wrong, you were blah, blah, you're
Hmm.
not kind. It's more of just like, hey, here's my observation, here's what I perceive to have happened. Like
Hmm.
like tell me more. Like
Yeah.
that's a key question I'd ask, is just tell me more. And you can elicit feedback, and you never know. I've got everything you can imagine. I've got, oh, I'm sorry, like, sorry, I was just super stressed today. XYZ was going on at home. Like, I didn't mean it, to like, yeah, I'm not happy in my role
Mhm.
in the job. And
Yeah.
either way,
Yeah.
you have movement. Now you can start
Yeah, you do. Yeah.
discussing
Yeah.
those areas.
Yeah. But it's always the opener, isn't it, into the difficult conversation? That's the key thing to get right. Um, and you gave some really good examples there. I think one I always liked to use was, um, okay, can I understand how this happened? And just in a particular tone of voice as well.
Yeah.
Um, I think that will elicit quite a lot as well.
Even the tone of voice is interesting. Like, can I understand how this happened? To tell
Yeah.
me how that happened. How did that happen? Like, even just tone of voice is so
Yeah,
crucial.
absolutely. But people don't realize that your tone of voice and your speed of speaking, particularly when you've got to have a difficult conversation, is key. And they don't realize that. They don't take enough time thinking about it, I think.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely a vital skill to have. Teresa, but believe it or not, the hour is quickly creeping up on us, which it always fascinates me how fast time goes. I'm curious, with the last few minutes, what are maybe
Mhm.
some key takeaways you have for our listeners here when it comes to identifying a toxic work environment, or just career advice in general?
I suppose identifying a toxic work environment. You and I spoke today about the key indicators. I think I would encourage people to look at those and test them out. One of the key indicators was poor communication or changing goals and timelines. So go through the list that I gave earlier and start testing them against your own work environment and see where you arrive at. So I think that would certainly be something I would encourage, because sometimes, Podge, if you're in an environment for such a long time, you just think it's the norm. It might not be the norm. So test it and see if it's if you get like 10 of those indicators, then you think, yeah, that's fairly
It's
toxic.
such a scientific approach, isn't it? You're pulling
Yeah,
yourself almost out of the
yeah,
situation and looking
yeah.
objectively.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
and
awesome.
that's if people can take the time out to do that, then that's great. I always encourage people to communicate with each other and like, not, if you're having in a toxic work environment, tell people about it. You don't have to tell people at work about it. Talk to your family about it, because it makes it less big. Then it makes it a little bit, doesn't make it as scary, I think, for them. So I think I would also say that. As regards career progression, key takeaway, I think there are certain key skills we can all focus on, and communication, absolutely improve your communication skills. Written skills, yeah, fine. Verbal skills as well. Also, start to use maybe a little bit of emotional intelligence, learn to see how people react to you when you're speaking. So, you gave a really good example there about how we can talk in different ways to people. I sort of said, oh, tell me how, let me understand this. And you went, oh, and tell me how that went wrong. So just be aware of the impact your tone and your communication will have on other people, I think would be that.
Yeah, really, really awesome advice. And the good news for our listeners here is you can get all that here on the podcast, but not just on the podcast. You can also get that with your career coach. So, Teresa, just to close us out with the last
Yep.
minute and a half, tell us a small bit about your business and how people can find you.
Okay, so I have a website, meetyourcareercoach.com. I'm on Instagram and I'm on Facebook, and people can connect with me that way. I see people in person, but primarily I am seeing quite a lot of people online now, because I'm working with people outside of the jurisdiction of Ireland. So, yeah, my background is HR. There's plenty of information about my background if people want to sort of delve into that and see what differentiates me from, say, another type of career coach. So, yeah.
Okay, and I'll have all the information to meet your career coach once this goes up on our social media websites as well, and we'll have links to that too, so people are going to be able to find you and going to be able to reach out.
Perfect. Thank you.
Teresa, what an absolute pleasure. I know we met each other in Killarney a few times as well, and now we're doing this over Zoom in two different spots. But it was
I
finally
know.
wonderful to get to chat to you, because I've always been fascinated about your career path, and the work that you're doing like really resonates with me, and I hope it resonated with our listeners too. I'm sure it did.
That's brilliant, Podge. Thank you so much for inviting me on. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you again.